Go ahead, Chris. Well, let's say we have a road trip. Not me.
No, I drove in that I was crying. And you're trying to had everything. And not even I didn't live on the rich part. I didn't live I said I would.
Hello, Lisa and others. We just unmuted. Can everybody hear us okay? Hello, everybody. Can anybody hear us at all?
Yes. I can hear you.
Okay, there we go. There's some yeses. Okay, great. Just making sure. Okay, so it looks like we have about 13 or 14 people in. Do we need to go through a laundry list for anybody, or are we pretty much okay with that? John or Lisa, I'm not sure which one of you needs to be the decider there. We need to take roll and figure out, or if we got that all figured out. Okay, Lisa, on your end, is there anything that you needed to bring up administratively to your folks, or anything you needed to bring up on behalf of Iowa, or anything like that?
No, not specifically, no.
Okay, I think I heard a response, but it was very, I don't know, what would be the word you used to describe? It was very muffled. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but we'll just say you were extremely muffled sounding.
Can you hear me better now?
You are a little less muffled, but you're still very soft and hard to hear. Okay, maybe Lisa, if you can just chat whether you had anything you needed to, okay, no announcements, thanks. All right, we'll just stick with the chat for now. Okay, so I'll just leave it for anybody else. Does anybody else have any input or anything at all that we need to bring up before we plunge into stuff? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Okay. So based on what Lisa and others brought up, I think you had looked for some basics on test sessions, which I think Dawn is going to talk about after me, right? Okay. And then you just wanted an opportunity for Q&A. And then the part that I was going to get into right now is there was a specific request for an overview of the cohort. So specifically, Lisa, but anybody really, does that sound correct? Does that get what the request was for this particular session? And if it's easier to chat than respond verbally, that's obviously fine and dandy.
And anyone else from the other states?
Okay, and yeah, we know we've got a few people, thank you. We know we've got a few people here that are from states other than Iowa. So if there's any of you not from Iowa who didn't really have the same opportunity to make a request ahead of time, you know, we're all ears on any of those kind of requests. Okay, I'm seeing a couple graphics that look positive, so I'm assuming that's right. Lisa, do you mind just confirming via chat maybe to make sure that we've got it right and we're not missing anything critical here? Okay, I'm not sure if you're hearing me or not. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay. So can you, sorry, one more goofy question from me. Can you all see my first slide? I've got it just set up to the first one. Pretty basic looking. It just says NRS for cohort. Is everybody able to see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, see lots of yeses there. Thank you very much. Okay, so it's about a 15 or 16 slide presentation. I'm just going to run through all this, and hopefully this will be helpful to everybody. So you'll see this just gives a little bit of an agenda or overview of what's on this presentation, a quick summary of changes. Here, let me blow it up just so I don't think I need to go anywhere else. So here, let me blow it up so the view's a little better. So a summary of those changes. Again, we're talking about the system that the feds basically put in place back in 2012. So a couple slides just giving you an overview, listing the cohort, and then again, we'll get into some of that detailed criteria. As you know, there's detailed criteria for enter and retain employment, so we'll cover what the details are for the employment cohort, and then we'll get into the details for obtain secondary. To be clear, by obtain secondary, we're talking about high school diploma and GED. So we'll go over what those details are, and then we'll go over the detailed criteria for enter post-secondary. So that's the one that has to do with enter college or training. You might say we'll start with the easy areas, which are employment, and then each cohort kind of gets progressively into crazier and crazier detail. So we'll just hit all of that highly detailed criteria for all the cohorts, and then if you have questions, you know, we can be all ears there. So does everybody understand the agenda? And hopefully this gets at the nature of the request that you gave us there over the last week or so for information about this. Does this sound more or less like what you were expecting to get into when you posed that question over the last few days? Okay. So yeah, I guess if you can all maybe mute your phone, it sounds like there is a little bit of background noise. I see that request via chat, and yes, I understand what you're getting at. Yes, I heard that too. Okay, so I'll assume that this is about what everybody was expecting to get themselves into. So first off, just to kind of summarize, is again, this occurred in 2012. The Fed, late 2011, early 2012, the Feds did a series of conference calls with all states and basically announced that they were going to make big changes to this NRF reporting. The bulk of the changes had to do with Table 5, which is the table that we're using for NRF follow-up. And so in the old system, as a lot of you remember, we used to identify core performance follow-up based on goals. So from a CASAS TE perspective, that's field 12 on the entry form, where you're giving primary and secondary goals to each learner. So in the old system, we would mark goals for the students, and the goals that we mark for the students would be what would trigger the student's eligibility on core performance. So in particular, they were looking at the goals of get a job, retain a job, enter college or training, and in some cases, earn high school diploma and earn GED. Those were what the Feds called the core follow-up goals. So if you gave the student one or more of those core follow-up goals, that in the student exited program, that's what would trigger the student's eligibility for core performance. If you can all just kind of chat, sorry, I'm going to look for a warm and cozy here. Do you all basically know what I'm talking about when I refer to that old system that the Feds had for core performance follow-up? Does everybody at least know what I'm talking about? Yes or no? Okay, good. Thank you for humoring me. We'll just use the chat. I think that will work best. So thank you for humoring me. I see a bunch of chats coming in. I haven't seen a no yet, so I'll just assume that you all know what I'm talking about here. That does help that I all know that you're with me. So again, late 2011, early 2012, they talked about changes that was implemented starting in program year 2012-13, where starting with that year, we moved out of that goal-based system and into what the Feds call the cohort-based system. So again, we started in 12-13, and that's when we, got into these more detailed ways of determining the student's eligibility. So for the here and now, I'll just get into those details, starting with the basic list. So the basic list is basically the same in the new system as it was in the old. The outcomes the Feds are looking for are basically the same. It's just the criteria that triggers the student's eligibility that was different. But the cohorts, again, same basic areas: enter employment, retain employment, obtain secondary, enter post-secondary. Okay, so I want to get into the gory details for each cohort. What I'll bring up, and this is really just because we have these, we've had this as a really detailed question forever and ever, is just to qualify about all cohorts. It's entirely possible for one learner to qualify for more than one cohort. That's something that's just come up across all states. We've had that,
20.
Okay, that's okay. Sorry. All right. So we've had that come up a lot for, Iowa, California, and all other states. That is, what if I, run those NRS reports and I find somebody qualifies for more than one cohort? Just a reminder that that's totally normal. It's not an error. If you have a student, for example, that qualifies for both enter post-secondary and enter employment, for example, that's not a TE error. That's not a user error. There's nothing odd about that at all. That's totally normal. And I'll just remind everybody that goes back this far that that was something that was totally normal for the goal-based system too. Sometimes students are going to qualify for more than one cohort. That's nothing unusual. Okay, so starting now with enter employment. Again, that's the first of the 4 cohorts, starting with the simplest one. So for the enter employment cohort, we're talking about people who are unemployed at the time of entry and exit sometime during the year. So that's about as simple and straightforward as it gets. Again, the goal no longer triggers a student's eligibility. It's simply the fact that they're unemployed upon enrollment, so that's what you mark on the entry form. and then sometime during the year they left program. So you see we have the entry update field, in screenshot form here, if that makes a little bit better sense. So again, if you're using entry update forms, you're marking unemployed on entry field 15 when the student enrolls, and then sometime during the year, you're marking left program on update field 7. That's the combination that qualifies the student for the enter employment cohort. Sanity check on my part. Once again, does everybody understand that basic formula for how a student qualifies for enter employment? If you want to mark in chat, that's the best way, I think. Okay, a couple of you. So does everybody understand? Okay, great. I'm seeing it flow in. Thank you very much. So again, just want to make sure that everybody understands. So I'm seeing a few yeses here. So I'll make this another sanity check. Any questions about enter employment? I think this one is about the most straightforward. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions here, so I'll just move on to retain employment. This one is also very, very simple. It's not quite as simple as enter employment, but it is simple. So to qualify for retain employment, the primary way they qualify is kind of the flip side of enter employment, where they're employed at entry, so you're simply marking employed instead of unemployed on that entry field 15, and then the same thing, you're exiting them sometime during the program year. That's the primary way. Another way where they can qualify for retain employment is they are unemployed at entry, and then sometime while they were still enrolled in your program, they got a job, and then they exited, just like we talked about for that other scenario. So here is the same information in screenshot format. Up at the top, again, you mark employed on entry field 15 labor force status, and they left program. So that very simple formula is one way they qualify for retain employment. A slightly more complicated formula is, again, they're unemployed upon entry. While they're still enrolled at your college or, program, they left program, and then also while they were still, enrolled in your program, you got a job on update field 9, so they were unemployed, they got a job, and then they exited. What that means is at the time, they were unemployed when they enrolled, but at the time of exit, they actually had a job rather than were still unemployed. So at the time of exit, they had a job, so that would actually trigger them for retain employment. Does everybody understand this, yes or no? I'm going to ask you to give me another sanity check here just to make sure that everybody's still with me. If you have questions, feel free to pose it in the chat here, and I'll clarify what other, okay, thank you. The yeses are spilling out. So once again, I'm just going to assume by this abundance of yeses, that means it's all crystal clear and that I don't need to explain anymore. I can move on to the next cohort. Okay, so a little bit on the employment cohort before I move on to obtain secondary. So just a clarification here. You should be, to the maximum extent possible, marking either employed or unemployed here. So this is something that's always been true. You generally want to mark a student as employed or unemployed. If you're marking retired or not employed, not seeking work, that should generally be something that is official in status in nature, such as, they're in a family situation, they have a work injury. If you're looking at corrections people who are incarcerated, that would obviously be a very official reason why they're not in the workforce. But again, if they're in the workforce, but they're just kind of saying, yeah, I haven't gotten around to looking for a job yet, that should be an unemployed, not employed, not seeking work. It should be more of an official workforce situation, such as a family emergency or an official work injury or an incarceration or any of those official things that your department or labor has decreed them as, kind of being officially out of the workforce. If they're in the workforce, they should be employed or unemployed. the not seeking work or, of course, retired would be another big reason why they're not in the workforce, obviously. But think of it as whether they're in the workforce or not. If they're not in the workforce, then obviously marking those bottom two bubbles is appropriate. But if they're officially in the workforce, you should really be marking those top two, employed or unemployed. And the reason is if they're retired or not seeking work, they're going to be considered out of the workforce, and that will ensure that they do not qualify for these cohorts. If they're in prison or something, that would be a reason why you would want that to happen for a lot of obvious reasons. But for most of your students that are in a community college or other setting, you're going to want them to be employed or unemployed, so they thereby do qualify for the cohort. So this, I'm not sure if I explained that clearly or not, so I'm going to ask for another sanity check here. Does everybody understand this point about how to mark labor force status field 15? Okay, I'm seeing one. Yeah, okay, here they come flowing in. Okay, everybody seems to say yes, so I haven't seen any no's or any questions. So once again, for my own interest, I'm going to assume that also is crystal clear to everybody. So if it's not, just feel free to chime in via chat, please. Okay, good. Thank you for that. Okay, so assuming that we're all crystal clear here on the two employment cohorts, I'm going to go ahead. Okay, Lisa, you started. We don't use retired in Iowa. Okay, great. So that's fine. And yes, retired is really just a subset of not seeking work, not employed, not seeking work anyway. Quite frankly, retired is one of those official reasons they'd be out of the workforce. So retired is actually kind of a subset of not seeking work anyway. Lisa, it looked like you were starting to ask a question. Is this point that Kathy is making in her chat item here pretty much what you were going to clarify anyway? If got a job is marked, does it not go in cohort? Well, if got a job is marked, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't go in the cohort, but what it does mean is that they will go into the retain employment cohort instead of enter employment, because again, if they were unemployed and then they got a job while they were at your program and then they exited, that would mean they would qualify for retain employment, because again, at the time of exit, they did have a job because they got a job while they were enrolled with you. So it just means they would go into retain employment instead of enter employment. Does that make sense, yes or no?
No, I'm good. I'm dialed in until I figure out.
Okay, I think you're trying to talk, Lisa, but I didn't hear you very well at all. What if nothing is marked? So if nothing is, I assume by nothing is marked, you mean nothing is marked on update field 9. So yes, if they are unemployed, or if they're employed and nothing is marked, then they go into retained cohort. If they're unemployed and nothing is marked, then they would go into the enter employment cohort.
Yeah. Like if I try this, like there's a governor on it. Yeah. Oh, you know what I'm going to ask?
Does that clarify what you were getting at, yes or no?
Over here, even though we already tried that.
Well, when you're done, let me know.
Okay, somebody's having a sidebar, so I guess if you can please mute whatever that is. Okay, yes. Okay, so Dawn is kind of monitoring the panel, so she's able to sniff out where that sidebar is coming from. So she's outing you and just making sure you mute your phone because you're causing some extra sidebar discussion that everybody can hear. Okay, I don't hear it anymore, so I'm assuming that sniffing out was what the doctor ordered for that particular issue. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so I think we're all good to go. So Elsa, you're responding via chat. Lisa, are you clear on everything now? Are there any outstanding things that I didn't really clarify? I'm not. I don't necessarily have the warm and cozy that I clarified all your questions. Okay, yes, I did. Okay, I officially have the warm and cozy, so I'll move on to obtain secondary. Okay, so obtain secondary, again, refers to HSE and high school diploma. So we'll start with HSE. For Iowa, obviously, that just means the high set. A couple Tennessee folks and a couple California folks. So for you guys, presumably, that might also mean the new GED or the task. For California, of course, that can mean the high set as well. So again, we call it HSE or high school equivalency to account for all of those equivalency tests, not just the GED. Obviously, in Iowa, you're a perfect poster child for why we do that. So it means any of those equivalency tests. So for HSE, and so I'm getting a little long-winded. Yes, Terry, I will send this to everybody on the list, once we're finished. So sometime between now and the end of the day, I will send that to everybody on the list. Okay. So anyway, I get a little long-winded here because the only way it makes sense to me is to kind of get at what the feds are getting at here. So what the feds are really doing when they're defining all these cohorts is they're basically saying what they said in 2012 is we're no longer satisfied with this goal-based system. The pointed issue here that the feds really were getting at with this change is what they noticed for many years with the goal-based system is some states did a really, really good job, and quite frankly, not to sound like I'm being sycophantic here or whatever, but you folks in Iowa are one of the states that actually did do a really, really good job with dutifully marking goals for everybody that related to get a job, keep a job, enter college or training, etc. But obviously all states did not do as good a job as Iowa did, and I can say that pretty confidently, remembering how you always rolled in Iowa. You had the wrath of John Hartwig and so on if you didn't do that, so that ensured that you guys did better than just about everybody else was doing that, but not everybody did such a good job with that, and the feds noticed it, so they were basically saying, forget it, we're no longer leaving it up to individual states or individual agencies to get people to qualify. We, the feds, are taking the law into our own hands and setting our own criteria. So we're no longer relying on individual agencies to dutifully mark, these specific goals that we, the feds, are requiring you to mark. So we're coming up with a different set of criteria. For enter employment and retain employment, the solution was a pretty elementary solution. Now that we're getting into things like HSE and diploma, the solution was a little more convoluted. So what the feds were looking at is saying, well, okay, for high school equivalency, we know that there's a lot of students in your HSE program. We know there's a smaller subset of those, that we really need to look at. So we know that there's a big pool of students enrolled in HSE or GED. We know there's a smaller pool of students that really need to be looked at in terms of whether they did or did not achieve the outcome. That is, the feds realized that not everyone simply enrolled in your HSE program is necessarily expected to complete that GED or high school equivalency this year. So what the feds basically set up is, of everybody enrolled in GED or HSE, of those enrolled in that program, we only want to look at those that attempted all 5 or all 4 subsections, depending on which specific exam they're taking. For high set, it would be all 5 subsections, obviously. So what they're basically looking at is, of those in your HSE program, we want to pinpoint those that attempted all 5 subsections and who also exited your program to be those that we specifically want to monitor for, obtained the high school equivalency. Okay, so does that make sense, yes or no? Can I get a warm and cozy here? Any questions or a simple yes if you understood that? Okay, I'm getting a few yeses. Okay, thank you for humoring me. So I'm assuming you all get that, so I'll move on. Yes, warm and cozy, thank you for that. Yes, Elsa's been in gazillions of my presentations, so she knows exactly what I'm looking for here. So thank you for that. So anyway, beyond that, I'm not entirely sure what you're doing in Iowa. My hunch is, just based on how you do everything else, is you're probably doing some kind of data match for those people, knowing that you data match the get a job, keep a job folks. So I'm assuming you probably do a data match, but I'm leaving that out of the PowerPoint presentation because I know that applies to some states but not others. So just know that that's probably what you would do. So if you data match, then you can probably safely just record everybody who, attempted the subsections and record everybody who completed HSE, and then the data match will take care of everybody else. I know in California, we do not data match employment, but we do data match HSE, and in California, that data match takes care of everybody who earned the outcome, obviously, and then furthermore, it also takes care of, those who completed all the subsections. The data match does all of it. I think your data match in Iowa is probably better than the one we have in California, so I would guess your data match at a bare minimum does all the things we do in California and probably more than that. Okay, is everybody clear on HSE? Okay, and then for high school diploma, again, that's the other side of obtained secondary. What they're looking at is, again, they're not expecting that everybody in the high school diploma program is necessarily going to be those folks that we want to look at for the obtained secondary cohort. Once again, the feds in their infinite wisdom are looking at that high school diploma category and trying to specify of those who are in your high school diploma program, which of those are going to be those students that are going to be the one that they, the feds, would generally expect to be the ones that should be completing their diploma this year. So what they're saying is at the federal level, of everyone in high school diploma, those who place into the ASE high instructional level specifically are going to be the ones that they specify for this cohort. So there's what I like to call the natural way and the artificial way to qualify for ASE high. The natural way is probably what a lot of you already know about. I think you all realize that the primary way that all students qualify into any of those levels for federal reporting is going to be through the pre-test score. So, he's laughing. He must have heard me. So did you hear me all the way out in the parking lot or something? Is that why you're laughing? Yes, you were like down at the water fountain and you heard my voice already? Okay, I had a funny feeling that's why you were laughing. Okay, Richard Ackerman is joining Dawn and I here, and he's laughing because he could hear me so far away from our conference room here. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Okay, so in any case, of those in high school diploma, we're looking at ASE high level. The natural way to place into ASE high in all levels is through pre-test scores. So for ASE high, we're specifically talking about those who pre-test 246 or higher. So that's one way to get into the cohort. The other way is you can mark ASE high as the self-reported level. So that's entry field 18, so you can mark it on the entry form, or you can just manually mark it directly into enterprise. So if you have students that have enough credits where they're already at the 11th or 12th grade level upon enrollment, you can mark that as a self-reported level. That's the alternative way to get those learners into ASE high. If you self-report the learner as ASE high and they earn the diploma or the GED, that will also automatically get them into ASE high to where they qualify for this high school diploma cohort. So that's a big mouthful. That's kind of a confusing explanation. So I'll just try to get the warm and cozy again. Does everybody understand that explanation? Yes or no? Okay, so I'm seeing a few, and there is some background noise going on. Can whoever it is, please keep it quiet because everybody can hear you. Okay, I'm getting yeses, so I'm assuming everybody understands this. So again, just to spell it out a little bit more, for your GED or high school equivalency, again, we're primarily looking at the program high school equivalency, although to be clear, it doesn't really mandate that in PE. And then meet all those basic NRS requirements. So that's another thing that I probably should have run up front. But to get into any of these cohorts, there's what I, call the usual suspects, like missing, gender, missing race and ethnicity, missing date of birth, 12 hours instruction, and so on. All those basic NRS requirements that are required for all NRS reporting are obviously necessary for all these cohorts as well. So if I wasn't clear about that at the outset, sorry about that, but just so you know. And then again, complete all 5 high-set subsections and/or all 4 subsections of the new GED. And so ultimately, what all states are going to be reporting on NRS Table 5 is the number who actually completed high school equivalency divided by those attempting all subsections. That's what the feds are looking at when you're looking at the HSE part of, the obtained secondary cohort. So sorry, there was a question here on chat that came up while I was explaining this. So students who come in and say they have high school credit can be entered as high school diploma instead of ABE. And so how many credits do they need? Only if you have a high school program. So yeah, that would be an Iowa specific. So thank you for clarifying that. I can't enter that exactly. That's something you really need to resolve in Iowa. But at the federal level, they just say simply enough, if they are an 11th or 12th grader upon enrollment and they're in instructional program high school diploma, that qualifies them for the cohort. We never specify anything about credits because not only does that vary greatly from state to state, but even within a state, that can vary a lot agency to agency. So quite frankly, that's something that we do not want to touch with a 10-foot pole, so we don't, because we know no matter what we say, it's going to be wrong to most people hearing it because everybody's different that way. So sorry, Deb, I don't have a good answer. That's the best I can do. Bren, thank you for offering that clarification from an Iowa perspective. I think, as far as I know, your clarification is really the best of all possible answers I know about with that. So Deb, I'm going to wait. Okay, so if you do not have an ASE program at your college, then they're never going to qualify for high school diploma anyway. I'm going to move on here to the next slide, which is for high school diploma. And you can see one of the big issues with high school diploma is it mandates that they be instructional program high school diploma. So I think that might answer your question more clearly, that if you do not have a high school diploma instructional program at your college, your students have a 0% chance of qualifying for this cohort, no matter what you can do. They could potentially qualify for HSE based on the subsections, but they have a 0% chance of qualifying on the high school diploma side. So does that clarify your question now, Deb? Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's a perfect segue to the high school diploma side. Obviously, they need to be program high school diploma. We talked about those basic NRS requirements. So again, missing birth date, 12 hours, gender, date of birth, etc. All of those basic, what I always like to call the usual suspects, apply to these core performance cohorts just as they do for NRS reporting in general. And then I mentioned it requires that they be ASE high. There's what I call the natural way of getting the free test 246 or above. There's what I call the artificial way of marking that self-reported level on entry field 18. And again, your district, your college district, or your school district, you really just have to use whatever credit system is in place in your K-12 school district or your community college district to determine what you can safely identify as the 11th or 12th grade level. That really does vary from program to program. So ultimately, from a federal point of view, when we're looking at Table 5, they're going to look at the people who earned high school diploma divided by the number of learners who qualified for ASE high using one of these formulas or the other. So is everybody clear about these formulas for the obtained secondary cohort? I'm going to do another sanity check here to make sure I have the warm and cozy. So fire up with your questions, or if you don't have any and you're crystal clear, please just give a little yes in the chat so I know that it's safe to move on. Okay, thank you for everybody's chat. Okay, I see just yeses and no questions, so I'm going to assume that means you all understand this and it's safe for me to move on. So a couple of clarity points here. Again, we're just looking at that entry field 18. You would mark ASE high and only ASE high to get them in there. This is something where the other fields really are kind of meaningless. This is an obsolete field that we don't use anymore. So we're using it now just to get them into ASE high cohort. If you mark ASE high according to the screenshot, that's what represents the quote-unquote artificial way. Okay, and then a reminder here is, you're going to mark past GED to earn the GED outcome, or high school diploma to earn the high school diploma outcome. For this one, we're still using, update field 9. Okay, so if everybody's clear, I'm going to transition out of obtain secondary and into enter post-secondary. It looks like everybody's clear, so I'll just move on. So for enter post-secondary, there are 3 different ways that a student qualifies for this cohort. The first, most common and simplest way has to do with highest degree earned. That's field 7 on the entry form. So you're marking basic, to get into post-secondary, you're looking at those that have either the GED or GED HSE level of education or the high school diploma level of education. If you mark either of those fields on highest degree earned entry field 7, that plus they exit program, that's one way. Second way is they enroll with the highest degree earned that's lower than GED or high school diploma, and then while they're still enrolled with you, they earn the diploma or the GED, and then they exit. In that example, that's sort of like that alternative we talked about for retained employment, where they had no formal education upon enrollment, say, but while they were still enrolled at your program, they did complete the diploma or GED, and it wasn't until a while after that outcome that they actually exited their program. That would be a way, that would be an alternative way where they would qualify for enter post-secondary. Then the third and final way is what we call a designated transitions class. That one you may or may not be familiar with, but I'll go over that briefly here in a few minutes. But for now, just realize there are 3 different ways in which a learner qualifies for enter post-secondary. I'm going to get into the gory details for each of these here in a minute, but I'm going to take this as another little sanity check. Sorry, I'm being obnoxious about this, but I'm going to ask for another sanity check without knowing the gory details. Is everybody on the right track here for understanding where we're going here with enter post-secondary? Okay, thank you for dutifully giving me that sanity check. Okay, great. So I'll move on here. So door number 1 here for enter post-secondary, this I really have to say is the most common way that we would do this. So again, on entry field 7, highest diploma or degree earned, we're marking GED or high school diploma. So that's the education level we're marking on the entry form. And then obviously, just like for all the other cohorts they exit, that's probably the most common way they qualify for enter post-secondary. Door number 2 is they enroll with a lower level of education. So I'm going to back up a little bit. So by lower level, we're just assuming you mark none here on entry field 7. So they don't have anything that represents a diploma or degree. So you mark none for that student upon enrollment. In this example, they have no formal education upon enrollment. While they're enrolled, they either pass HSE or they get the high school diploma. And then after that occurs, they exit. So that would be another way to enter post-secondary. And then the third and final way indicates they're in a designated transition class. So this one I'm not really sure you know about or not. We've talked about it intermittently over the last couple of years, but my hunch is a lot of you are not familiar with this so much. But what you see here is a screenshot of your class instance record in TE. So again, that's the class record that provides you with those gory details, such as where you can mark the instructional program for the class, if there's any special programs. It also is where you can mark all those detailed issues, such as the days of the week the class meets, or the number of hours per week, and things like that. A lot of those issues are kind of optional for you, but one of the detail-oriented issues you need to mark there is that section called that you could potentially mark there is the section called transition focuses. So without necessarily being overly familiar with the transition section, are you all at least familiar with what I'm talking about when I represent that class instance record in TE? That's the part I'm going to ask that you sanity check me on, is are you all familiar with the class instance record? Okay, so thank you again for humoring me. So it's in that TE class instance record where you can potentially mark transitions. If you do not have any transitions classes, obviously you don't need to mark anything here. The default behavior in TE will be NA, just meaning there is no transitions focus. So if you have not really gone about the business of designating any classes like that, you're perfectly in compliance by marking NA for all classes. But just so you know, you do have the option of marking these transition classes in TE, where you would just go into that class instance record, and these check boxes are examples of what you might check to officially designate the class as an official transitions class. That is, you're using it as a transition to work, transition to workforce training, or transition to post-secondary. If you checked any of those boxes here in the TE class instance record, you're basically saying that you, the agency, is officially proclaiming this class to be a designated transitions class. What that does for you is it circumvents entry field 7, and it will basically qualify that learner to be in the enter post-secondary cohort regardless of what their education level is from entry field 7 or whatever you mark upon enrollment. So the example would be, and some people bring this up, where you might have some students, there's a lot of possibilities, but by far the most common issue here is you might have some students that might have a higher education level that they might have obtained from their own country or something like that, where maybe they do not have their GED or high school diploma in the U.S., but maybe they already have a bachelor's or master's or something like that from their own country, but they're enrolling in your program. They're enrolling in your program nonetheless, potentially to complete their high school equivalency, or maybe even more commonly to enroll in some sort of career technical education program and so on. We're sure they have their master's degree already from their own country, but reality dictates that they really just need to get involved in some career tech ed program so they can get a job right away, or they can, complete their high set right away, or whatever it might be, so you can mark them as in a designated transitions class in order to still get them to qualify for this enter post-secondary cohort, because the student is really focused on these post-secondary outcomes and or CTE-related outcomes. So that's the reason why they're in your college, so you want to get them into this designated transitions class so you can still track them for those follow-up outcomes that they're likely to get into, because that's the whole purpose of their enrollment with you in the first place.
So Jay, a question?
Yeah.
Question. Okay, so Jay, so then what I'm thinking is, for we have a class in particular that has their ESL, but a lot of those students are being pre-tested at about 236. So we can designate that class as a transitions class and still be able to obtain those pay points, correct?
Well, potentially. I mean, we're not going to get into payment points here because this is really mostly an Iowa session, definitely not California. So I'm not going to talk payment points at all. But to be clear, this would affect their ability to qualify for core performance. So it wouldn't be a direct outcome, but it would potentially mean that they would qualify for your core performance follow-up, which, yes, indirectly could potentially lead to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it specifically means they have a better chance to qualify for core performance, which, as you know, indirectly could potentially get them to qualify for your follow-up survey. Hopefully you got what you needed to out of that.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay. So everybody else, are we clear on this enter post-secondary cohort, yes or no? That was probably the single most long-winded explanation of several long-winded explanations, so I really want to make sure you understand that one. Okay, I'm seeing just yeses here, so I assume everybody's clear. Okay, so this is just FYI if you're having trouble determining what exactly is meant by a quote-unquote transitions class. Here is a definition of the sort of thing you might use as a guideline for whether you do or do not want to mark that class record as a quote-unquote transitions class. So this is just FYI, I'm not going to read that. Okay? And then as a qualifier for enter post-secondary, marking it on the update does not necessarily mean they achieve post-secondary. It's going to be something they do after they exit. Okay? And so I think that's everything I had to say about the cohort. I guess for starters, I'll see if you have any cohort-related questions first. And then if there's nothing on that, we'll kind of open it up to general Q&A and or any other topics that might be on this agenda. Okay, I'm not hearing anything or reading anything, so hopefully the no questions just means it's so incredibly crystal clear. How could you possibly have any questions and not everybody checked out a third of the way through the presentation and, you know, gave up on it or something? Okay, so let's see here. Who was Okay, so that's an Iowa question. I don't think you really need to do that. I voiced that to Elsa's question because I know Elsa's from California. So I think the answer is no, but I'm hoping that Lisa or somebody can clarify, you know, how you're doing this more specifically for Iowa.
Yeah, Lisa
Okay.
says they do data matching.
Okay,
so they
Lisa,
don't.
did you already read? Okay, in order to determine what? Okay, so that's just a follow up on this. So Lisa.
I do data match.
Right, I think you do data match, but is there anything you can say to clarify Deb's question? I think that's probably a better question for Iowa to clarify than for us to clarify.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can kind of hear talking, but I can't hear what anybody's saying.
We do data matching, and I guess I'm really concerned about marking that the retained employment, those qualifications that get them that cohort. Generally, I don't believe our field is following up with students with, to see if they're employed or not. We're doing that via data matching, so are they being left out of the cohort?
Okay, I could not hear that very well at all, but what I think you just said, Lisa, is that you do a data match in Iowa, so there is no following up via survey or any other method that you need to use. Hopefully I've got you right, Lisa. I couldn't hear you that clearly. Okay, let's see here. Moving on to another question. Okay, we do data matching. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can't hear. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. All right, all right. So Darla, sorry, I didn't really follow the chat as thoroughly. Okay, if they begin at the incomplete HSE, if they complete HSE, you know, that was obviously you primarily are looking at HSE obtainers to be instructional program HSE, but technically there is no specific check that requires they be instructional program HSE. To be clear, on the diploma side, that absolutely is mandatory. If they are not instructional program high school diploma, you can safely assume they have a 0% chance of getting into the cohort. On the HSE side, that's not necessarily true. So if they're in ABE, they can still potentially qualify. The way that would happen again is if they attempted all 5 subsections, they would still qualify for the cohort. Does that answer your question, Darla? So Darla, okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Okay, so thanks for your questions, Darla and Deb. Anybody else with any cohort-related questions before we move away from this topic? Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything else, so I'll take that as a no. So I guess, are there any, I guess we just want to open it more to general Q&A then, maybe not anything related to cohorts. I know there were a couple other general questions that you had prior to this session. So Lisa, you would send an email, maybe the floor is yours. If you would just rather open it up to everybody for any additional questions, you know, that's fine as well. General Q&A is fine, okay. So Lisa or anybody else, are there any more general questions you have that you wanted to bring up before we conclude this session overall? Via chat or verbally. Okay, I'm not hearing anything but crickets chirping. Is that because you don't have any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so my question has to do with the student gains.
Okay, why don't we take that offline, because that's a state report. I really want to stay away from California stuff here.
Okay.
Sorry, but that's completely inappropriate for this session.
Is Kathy
Okay.
Fuller out? What's in there?
Okay.
Someone's asking about the new batch edit. What did you want to know about it?
Let me call him on my cell phone because he messed up.
We're talking.
We don't hear anything, so I assume Kathy's going to type. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're not hearing, so you need to type the question.
Yeah, she says how to use it and how it works.
Okay, well, yeah, I wasn't.
She is launched, but I don't know if you have time.
Yeah, I wasn't really set up to do a demo.
Well, I can talk through it if you want.
You're welcome to.
Okay, so I'll try to do it quickly without a big demo. Hopefully, and if that doesn't work, then we'll take the time to maybe do a demo or get back to you independently. But the batch edit feature is a new feature that's in most listers. I've said most because I'm not sure it's in 100% of them, but it's definitely in the overwhelming majority of them. And what it basically does is it allows you to make the same edit to multiple records at once. So it's something on my end anyway everybody's been asking for since TE started, because when people scan a bunch of records or perhaps import a bunch of records, there's that inevitable situation where you've got 100 ABE students and you mark them all as ESL by mistake. or you have 25 students that belong in class 101, but you mark them all as being in class 102 by mistake, or all of those routine errors that you know happen all the time. So prior to this, you had to go in record by record and edit each record at once. So what batch edit does is if you have those universal errors that you know exist on many different records, you can use the batch edit by highlighting all of those records at the same time and then clicking that batch edit button. So in my example, if it was, 100 ABE students that were all marked ESL by mistake, you can highlight all 100 records in your lister, click batch edit, and change all 100 of them, in my example, from instructional program ESL to instructional program ABE by one click. So then all 100 in my example, you've successfully edited to the correct program. Richard has an extra thing to add, maybe.
If you want to discover what batch edit does in each of the listers, the best way is simply to select more than one record. So the button will be dim until you select at least 2 records. And there's two ways to select records. One is shift click if you have contiguous records. The other is control click if they're separated. So you should master those 2 techniques if you don't know them. One is control click and one is shift click. Once you've selected more than one record and you click the batch edit button, it's pretty much self-explanatory what fields you can change. So you can discover on your own, how that's going to apply.
Okay. So let's see here. I think Deb's question was just answered by Richard, that yes, you'll see a little screen that comes up when you highlight multiple records. John's question is, yes, provided you're doing this in the class enrollments lister or the class records lister, by all means, just use the filter and sort features in the TE lister and just filter it for one particular class. So if you know there's an edit that applies to all 20 students in one class, say, but it doesn't apply to everybody, just use your filter and sort features that you have for all listers already and just filter it to show just the students in that one class, and that would be another way to highlight the specific students that you want to perform that particular batch edit. And yes, Kathy, you make some good suggestions. Yes, zip code, labor force, those are good examples. Those are also real good examples of fields where this might really be helpful. Okay, so John, I see feedback. I think that answers your question. Kathy, Deb, are your questions answered as well? Okay, so you might have lots of class records. So if that's the case, with your question, Kathy, and a little bit on to John's question, that might just mean that you would want to use the class enrollments lister rather than the class records lister, because class enrollments is your non-duplicated lister, whereas class records is duplicated. So I think maybe not in all cases, but in most cases, that's simply averted by going to class enrollments instead of class records.
Deborah asked about that. I think that pertains to batch insert.
Well, it could be, yes, it does.
For retained in program enrollment.
Okay.
Insert.
So yes, first off, Deb, yes, that exit retained in program is something you would find in the program enrollment lister. So yes, if you want to batch edit a bunch of students to show as retained in program, yes, you could batch edit that. There's also a feature, so that assumes that you already have program enrollment records for everybody. If you're adding that enrollment because you need to retain them, there is a similar new feature called batch insert that you can use. That would be something that you only can find from the student demographics lister and the test lister. We've done that, because those are what we consider to be the 2 most common ways a student would get into your database initially, but what that would do is basically create program enrollment and or class enrollment from a single free test or from a single importing of a student demographic. Okay, so let's see here. Deb, does that answer your question? Okay, all right, that might, okay, it sounds like you're okay. But anyway, I opened the can of worms, so I'll also bring up, so I think we covered batch edit thoroughly. But I will bring up, there are two additional buttons, one called batch delete, one called batch insert. So explain insert again, please. I will do that. But before I do, let me bring up batch delete, which is a simpler explanation. So batch delete is also available just like batch insert is, or like batch edit is, excuse me. So what batch delete does is just how batch edit allows you to edit multiple records at once. Batch delete allows you to delete multiple records at once. So like Deb's example, by marking them all from exit to retained, or my example of switching, program ESL to program ABE, those are both good examples of why you might want to use batch edit. Batch delete would be more like you did an import or you did a scan session and everything is just fouled up beyond repair. So obviously that happens. Sometimes you have multiple import errors or multiple scan errors. If you brought in a big set of records and everything is completely wrong, editing to death will take forever. So sometimes the better solution is just delete all 100 records from that scan session or delete all 50 records that you just imported and just re-import or rescan so you can batch delete all of them and that just gets all of them out of your system so you can start over with the scan session or the importing or whatever it is that you're doing. So I will explain batch insert, but is everybody clear now on batch delete and batch edit both? Sorry, sanity check time. Okay, thank you for that. Yep. Okay, so then batch insert. So that's a little bit more involved feature. To be clear, you will, batch edit, batch delete, you find in just about all the listers. Batch insert is only found in the test lister and the student demographics lister.
And the reason for that is the difference is you're creating a whole new record. With batch edit, you're only dealing with an element within a record, like retain in program or something like that. With insert, you're creating a new record. So that's why there's only those two places that you would do it from. So I'll let Jay continue.
Okay. So what Richard explains is kind of a command decision. There's a gazillion ways in which you might have a student first pop up in your TE database. But universally, anyway, by far the two most common ways is by initially pre-testing the student or by initially entering that student's demographics. So again, those aren't the only ways, but those are universally anyway the most common ways a student might first get into your TE database. So those are the listers where you can do batch insert. So again, by creating a student record by a pre-test and or by demographics, again, you have a student entered into your database, but you don't necessarily have all the info you need. So you can use the batch insert from those two listers that represent those most common ways of entry. And then you can batch insert class enrollment. You can batch insert program enrollment. You can also batch insert program year activity. So let's say you bring in a bunch of students from the pre-test. They're students that belong in your NRS WIA2 database, so you can batch insert all of those pre-tested students into a particular program and or batch insert into a particular class and or insert them into your program years lister so you can automatically set them up to have current program year activity.
Kathy also asked, she said, I was trying to add special programs using batch edit and had difficulties. She should use batch insert, but is special programs available for that?
Don't know off the top of my head.
I don't think so, because I think special programs is in your student records lister, which would not be something that, well, you should be able to batch edit, but so you can't batch insert that way, but you should be able to batch edit by going into records, student records. I believe that's the specific lister and the specific record type that includes that special programs field. So that would be presuming that you've already created that info for the student. So assuming it's already in there, you could go to records, student records, and batch in edit those particular student records to add that particular special program or programs to the group of students. So Kathy, does that answer your question, yes or no? I'm not sure if I'm answering it right or not. Okay. Okay, so any other questions? Anything from either one of you guys that you wanted to bring up independent of any of this?
One thing I'll mention is Iowa has requested collecting the Social Security number, and we're planning to release that in TE on Friday. So that's a promise, not a promise, it's tentative, but I think we'll make that, and that's when you'll be able to add as an option. You don't have to turn it on. You can turn on the option of collecting Social Security number along with demographics when they're taking a test and eTest. All right, any last questions?
Are you adding collecting full address?
I don't think we've had that request. So you'd want a student in eTest to put in their full address. Okay, I'll have to look at that.
Address, email, and phone.
And phone numbers and email address. Okay, I guess it's all the registration info. If you're not collecting it elsewhere, you want to collect it in eTest. Okay, I get the message. All right. Okay, got it, Deb. You're welcome. Anything else? We've gone over an hour, so most people may be leaving already, but I think we've got it.
I go ahead and wrap it up.
All right. That's one.
Okay. All right. If nobody has anything else, thank you very much. Thanks for your time, and I'll send that little PowerPoint here later in the day to everybody on the list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.